What's up, guys? Tony Hannity's here from LazyTechTV, and I am with our founder of LazyTechTV, Lazy Tech Guys, Mr. Radford Castro.
How's it going, man?
I'm good. This is really exciting. This is our first press event between you and I that we've had in a couple of years, man.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, this is great to have you back in the road on the field.
Thanks for having me again.
Of course, man. It's my pleasure. I mean, you're really the one that got me into this field, if we're honest about it. But now that we're back, Lenovo's back, man. I mean, since they have purchased Motorola from Google, we haven't really heard too much of rumblings of what Motorola, that division, is doing. We've heard a lot more about ATAP, the division that Google kept from Motorola, but not so much like what is really happening with the Moto X or anything like that. And now we know. Last year's Moto X kind of failed. I think a lot of the Android users could agree with that. But we don't have a Moto X anymore. We've got a Moto Z and a freaking phablet, a 6.4-inch phone. Come on.
Yes, it was pretty ridiculously large. We actually did some comparisons if you got a chance to see some of the B-rolls that we're doing. But the comparisons, obviously, we're going back to the whole phablet days where basically you're holding a tablet in your hand and putting all that much radiation in your brain.
Okay, well, so here's the thing. When I first had the Note 1, the first Note at CES 2012,
that started it all.
Yeah, that did start it all, and I said to myself, I love this. This is big, but I could deal with this. 6.4 inches, I don't love this, and I'm not dealing with it. That is just way too massive. I had the Nexus 6 by Motorola. That was 6 inches. That was too big.
Yes.
Now they're going 6.4, but this is the Fab 2 Pro. It's a very niche device. All right, so let's make sure that we're not confusing the two. The Fab 2 Pro, 6.4 inches, but then the Moto Z and the Moto Z Force, those are more in line of kind of the normal...
The normal flagship devices that you'd normally see coming from companies that are just kicking it out.
Right, 5.5-inch screens, QHD resolution, 4 gigabytes in RAM, things that we want.
Yeah.
So there was a ton of stuff. Kind of a long keynote, if we're being honest. It was, you know, because they also talked about infrastructure, the cloud.
They
had
which they admitted were boring.
Yeah, he outright said, not for the boring stuff. I was like, all right. They had Ashton Kutcher drop a phone. What was really impressive to you? What did you find put Lenovo over the top? Was it something that they had on stage, or more so of something that we saw back here?
I would say it's a little bit of both. And so on the stage, what was really interesting is to actually see Lenovo really push at the cloud and see how that kind of develops with their other vendors and other partners. But the other thing that I thought that was very interesting is seeing how their flagship phone was going to be very modular. Hence, they were talking about the whole Moto mods, right? And in the Moto mods, they were trying to encourage not just software developers, but hardware developers wanting to extend that platform to allow the phone to do a variety of things, which included things like extending sound and video, projecting into the screen and stuff like that. So, but they already had some big names in there. They had JBL, and they had even some, fashion names like Kate Spade and all those guys. So it's really interesting to see all that stuff. I'm just kind of curious of where that's going to go when they're trying to sell this thing, and whether they can get enough, galvanize enough developers to work with their hardware and software.
Well, here's the thing. This is kind of a chicken before the egg thing, because if the Moto Z isn't good, developers aren't going to develop for it.
Well, that's the thing. It's a chicken and egg at the same time, because people want to buy because of certain types of things, but if those are in the process of being made, it's a weird selling point, right?
So you're kind of what Kutcher was saying, instead of trying to make the ultimate phone, make a good phone, but have ultimate add-ons after the fact with Moto mods and this Moto mod development kit. I don't know. I mean, I like the modular idea. I've liked it ever since the phone blocks concept came out like 2.5 years ago. But in reality, people just want, from what I've dealt with, I feel like people just want one thing and not necessarily have to add on additional accessories after the fact. I mean, I guess to a certain degree, the personalization and customization of devices are starting to come to fruition. And it also really depends on how much these mods cost, you know? If, like, say, the battery, or rather the projector, is like $200, there's no way. If the JBL sound boost is also like $150,
No.
No, I'm just gonna get like a $90 Bluetooth speaker.
Right.
Just bring it with me, throw it in my pocket.
Put it in one of those, really cheap, things that you see in the CES where they, artificially boost the sound by redirecting
Oh yeah, kind of like a gramophone or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting though is that you mentioned earlier about how, it's a chicken and egg thing, right? And that there's still going to be some sort of, weary about it. But here you have Ashton Kutcher saying that it's going to be a game changer in terms of, embracing the phone in a variety of ways, which is really interesting. But again, it's going to come down to the sales. It's going to come down to getting the initial interest of, is this a good and fast phone? Can it do everything it needs it to do?
Not only coming down to the sales is a big point, but it is, at least here in the United States,
right,
it's exclusive to Verizon.
Oh, that's a big one. That's a very, very, very good point. And you'll notice too that when we were actually there listening to the keynote, we were hearing some oohs and ahs, and even some other sides of it where people were like, Verizon, no. And so there's some interest, but when you divide that interest into different carriers, that definitely shorts out your sales.
Do you think companies see the success in having exclusives, or
no? Unless they offered a really long contract and a very good license, very good long-term license to get that, that would be very difficult. Another thing also, to your point, is that you have a lot of these platforms that are working on top of this phone that's really built on hopefully getting a good initial installed base. So that's going to be very important for developers making a decision whether they want to develop for that platform or some other ones that's probably more widespread. You have JBL and all these other guys are experimenting with it, but if they could get that base to come in and actually have that good strong following to be able to extend that following into the people who buy the Moto mods, that's going to be very key. So in a way it's almost like you said, the chicken and egg thing, because the Moto mods help try to sell the fact of the device, the whole narrative of like, hey, you know what, if you buy this device, there's going to be lots of cool stuff that's going to be coming out for it. So that's kind of like the selling point that's coming from Lenovo, which it's again like sort of a wait and see attitude.
It's kind of like buying a printer, and then the ink is a little bit more expensive, but it's a really good printer, so it's kind of worth it. So maybe it's the same kind of like analogous idea. I saw some of the R&T stuff where they're projecting a keyboard onto a surface. They're also allowing you to dock it to a computer monitor, and thusly your phone becomes a desktop experience with multi-window facets. So there's a lot of capability. There was one thing though that when they demonstrated on stage, well rather down here on the floor with Megan McCarthy, and that was their flexible screens. This has nothing to do with Moto Z or the other thing. But Rad, why don't you expand on what you saw over at the Flexible Tech booth over there?
So Lenovo had a chance to do some really quick demos. They had a celebrity YouTube person come in there and actually demonstrate using wearable tech in two different forms. Actually, 4 different forms melded into 2. One of which was a wearable tech that converted to a phone, and one which was a foldable tablet that turned into a phone. So you have these different devices that are trying to morph into different types of form factors that allowed people to get a little bit more value out of it. Now, the only question is now, since this is such a very early phases, how do these kinds of interfaces work? What happens when you're working with different apps that are folded and unfolded? How does that work when you're working with Android? Is we using Android? Which it seems to appear that they will be using that. How do apps actually operate in that type of world versus the standard world of just swiping? So those are some of the questions that are kind of coming up right now as people kind of glimpse at this type of technology for the first time.
Yeah, so from what I could deduce is if you're looking at a single application on a folded tablet, which was called the Folio, and you open it up, that image or that window then expands to the full frame. However, once it's expanded and then you open up 2 programs at the same time, you can have them side by side, and especially since Android N does support multi-window functionality, that's not going to be a problem. But once you have 2 apps side by side, once you close it, then those 2 apps will shrink according to what side that they're on. And so if I have my phone on one side and YouTube on the other, I can use my phone on one side and then YouTube's playing on the other side of the screen. It's weird. I get what you're saying. What is the use case? I don't really know. But the concept of there actually being a working model that we saw, that was impressive. Because we've heard a lot of rumblings of wearable tech that has folded screens, and it's like patent logins and just concept like concept videos with 3D rendered videos, but not actually like in hand. We freaking saw it, man.
Right, yeah. It's really interesting because we saw some of these concepts in early stages where they were not really foldable yet, but separate screens.
Yeah.
But now that we're seeing something more
that was
foldable,
like just last year.
No, we actually saw as far as back as Microsoft when they did not engage with that kind of technology where they were using a book type of tablet. But this is something that now is one piece where you're having a seamless experience when you're opening it up. Now, to your point, you were talking about how Android expands to that point. I have yet to see some applications. I guess we have yet to see applications that would make use of that type of use case, because that would be interesting to see how is it gonna. Can you set it up where you download a Kindle app and then now it's a book, you can actually see page to page as you usually see it, or can we see something that's a little bit different where you have the GPS set up and you have a full map view from a state level as far as a local level, something like that.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the application, the UI design, the UX design. That's going to have to come into play.
We were talking about foldable design where we're going horizontally with the folio, right?
Sure.
And then the C plus, which you were demonstrating, was the
right.
wearable.
That goes around the wrist.
Right. That goes more
like
towards up and down.
Yeah.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see how they make use of those interfaces, if any, when that particular device actually sees the light of day.
Yeah.
So.
And
but again,
that's a big point when they actually see the light of day. These might not ever see the light of day.
Right.
And when they do, it might be like a subtle iteration of what we saw. But the fact of the matter is the future is here, the future is now. We know a lot of these companies are doing stuff. This is the first time I'm actually seeing it in hand, in person.
Yeah.
Last thing, if there was one thing that really stood out to you of everything that we saw, what would that be?
The food.
All right.
No, seriously. I think the wearable technology is a very fascinating instance, but again, it was still a prototype, but it just seemed like they wanted to get a reaction from the crowd. They wanted to get a reaction from how the people respond to the news that's being played out by the press. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but I think the one thing that I was surprised about is really just seeing how they're taking this modular stuff to another level, because now you have Android, you have this other competing platform that Google was working on that had all this modular stuff down to the very low level of these different types of phones where you can build them like a PC, but now they kind of try to simplify it where here's your phone with a standard spec and here is, here's something to expand it with, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And so some of the reactions I was seeing from the press was the fact that they were, like Snap-ons. This is interesting. It feels like I've seen this before, but now they're trying to add some more function to it.
Not only function, but it's just very ease of use, and there's expandability because of the fact that there's going to be an SDK for it.
Right.
One thing that really interests me, because finally I've been waiting for Project Tango to actually come to fruition. Now it's just called Tango. Powered by Google's Android, and they had what we mentioned earlier, which was the Fab 2 Pro. There was a Fab 1, apparently no one cared about it. So the Fab 2 Pro, we had it in hand.
Yes.
Rad, you were able to do some dominoes, and you were able to have a little rabbit on the table.
Right.
It was cool. It was real time. It remembered the placement of every little
that was
thing.
The very impressive part, and those were some of the things that they were addressing in the keynote.
Yeah.
That was very hard to solve from an engineering standpoint. Now, if you remember when AR was just very early, it was hard to remember those points. They had to actually use cue points from like a card, just the same way a 3DS was, right? They would use these different patterns to allow the camera to see what points which points are existing in a certain space.
Right, you had to have a physical thing in the real world that it could always point back to. The dragon is going to be here. Yeah.
Right. Same thing, just like the apps that you see, where you see, an animated dollar bill and the comics and things like that. From some of the apps that we've
seen in the past. Yeah.
Before. But this one is actually measuring and doing dimensional spacing in real time.
In real time.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's literally coordinating every single dot in 3D space.
Which was like millions of dots, it looked like. It was an immense amount of dots.
Yeah, an immense amount of data being thrown onto that little phone.
Terabytes of data.
Yeah.
And using the cloud.
Right.
That, going back to your original point, the use of the cloud in this kind of technological world is super important.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why, because computing in the device itself, it's already a big freaking monster. If you want to do all the computing in there, you would have to add maybe 2 more of that size just to be able to do half of it.
Right.
So the cloud is very, very important. But I've got to say, of all the demos that we did with that device, The Domino's was the best. I really enjoyed that. There was a Ghostbuster thing that they had going on there. Yeah, I don't know if we'll have time to try that. I want you to check out the Rager store, but yeah, Rad, thank you very much again for hanging out. Come with me. Allowing me to support you. Let everyone know where they can find us and how they can get involved.
Well, you can find us at LazyTechTV. You can subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, find us on Facebook as well as Twitter, and look out for the website coming up before July.
Wait.